Picture the sprawling estate, bathed in late afternoon sunlight. A sleek black limousine waits by the fountain engine, humming softly. Inside the palatial foyer stands Elizabeth Harrington, the wife who has just discovered her husband's double life. Upstairs in a lavish bedroom, her husband's phone buzzes with urgent messages from the mysterious Sabrina Deschamps. Across the Atlantic, in a Parisian hotel suite, airline reservations are confirmed, champagne is chilled, and a secret romance blossoms in the City of Lights. What none of them realizes yet is that the next 48 hours will erupt into a betrayal so shocking it will transform their worlds forever. Richard Harrington was, by any measure, a man of extraordinary success. Tall, confident, and impeccably dressed, he had built his fortune through a series of shrewd investments that catapulted him from a middle-class upbringing in upstate New York to the exclusive circles of the ultra-wealthy. If you had glimpsed Richard and his wife Elizabeth at a fundraiser for the Harrington Family Foundation, or seen them featured in a glossy business magazine, you might have believed they lived the ultimate fairy tale. Indeed, their estate sat perched on 40 acres of rolling green hills just outside Greenwich, Connecticut. A white stone driveway wound in a leisurely curve through manicured gardens until it met the ornate fountain at the entrance. Inside the foyer, ornate chandeliers sparkled overhead, and marble floors echoed beneath footsteps. Every corner spoke of a life meticulously curated, the perfect art on the walls, the perfect staff standing by the perfect parties thrown for philanthropic causes. On the surface, it was the picture of matrimonial bliss and refined luxury. Yet behind that polished veneer, the Harrington marriage was not what it appeared. Though Elizabeth Harrington, a former concert pianist, was elegant and composed in social settings, the demands of this lifestyle had left her feeling invisible. She had spent the first 10 years of her marriage hosting gala dinners and making polite small talk at exclusive clubs. Richard's frequent business trips, while they paid for the luxurious existence she enjoyed, took a toll on the relationship. Often she found herself alone in the imposing mansion, for weeks at a time, her music echoing through empty halls. When Richard was home, his attention was fleeting, a quick kiss on the cheek, a politely distant conversation about the next corporate deal, and a half-hearted question about her upcoming piano performance. Sometimes Elizabeth suspected that the close scrutiny of the wealthy world around them also played a role. Secrets are hard to keep in a sphere where private investigators' security details and rumor-hungry tabloids hover like hawks. Everything seemed under a microscope. To keep up appearances, they had to act seamlessly as the devoted couple. Yet the more they strained to maintain this flawless facade, the further apart they drifted. On one particularly breezy autumn evening, their chauffeur Oliver pulled the limousine up to the front steps after collecting Richard from the airport. Elizabeth was there as always to greet him. She studied Richard's expression, the faint lines around his eyes, the pinch of tension in his jaw. He seemed more distant than usual. That was saying something because she had grown accustomed to his aloofness after so many years. As he entered the foyer, they exchanged the usual pleasantries. Richard handed off his jacket to their butler Bernard and made a beeline for his study. She wanted to ask him about the business trip, about his meeting with real estate moguls in Hong Kong, and about the new partnership rumored with billionaire Elon Musk's philanthropic arm. But she hesitated, sensing that he carried a tension she might not want to disturb. Instead, she followed quietly, stepping gingerly into the study behind him. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. He was seated at his imposing mahogany desk, rifling through a stack of letters and documents. His smartphone lay face down, as though he had intentionally hidden whatever might light up its screen. He lifted his head, forcing a hollow smile. Of course. Just tired, he replied. It was a long flight from Hong Kong. I'll be all right. Elizabeth nodded and turned to leave, but not before noticing the subtle shift in his posture when his phone vibrated. His entire body stiffened, and he quickly placed his hand over the device, shielding it from her view. The phone buzzed again. This time, the screen lit up with a name, Sabrina Deschamps. He practically flinched when he realized she could see it. He looked over his shoulder at Elizabeth. She managed a smile, but her heart drummed with suspicion. The name was not familiar to her. It might have been a business associate, perhaps a legal contact, or a high-profile partner from Europe. After all, Richard frequently engaged with an international crowd. Yet there was something in his reaction that warned her. She had never seen him so protective of a phone call. Before she could pursue the matter, he cleared his throat, grabbed the phone, and said, "I need to take this in private." "Would you mind, dear?" The word sounded as foreign as Sabrina's name on his screen. She stepped out, albeit slowly, letting the door close behind her. The weight of her suspicions felt heavier than ever. Their marriage, which once had glowed with promise, was overshadowed by an uneasy sense that everything was about to unravel. Over the following days, Elizabeth moved through her daily routines, trying to dismiss the nagging fear. She threw herself into her piano practice, Debussy's, Clair de Lune, Chopin's nocturnes, all the pieces that once soothed her restless soul. But now they seemed discordant, overshadowed by her husband's emotional distance. Even her weekly lunch dates with her longtime confidant, the philanthropic maven Catherine Belville, brought little relief. Elizabeth confided in Catherine about the phone call, about the name Sabrina, about Richard's changed demeanor. Catherine's eyes widened. "Are you sure it was a personal call?" "I'm not sure of anything anymore," Elizabeth said, sipping her Earl Grey tea. "But I can't shake the feeling that something is wrong." Catherine, known for her blunt honesty, set her teacup down. "Then find out," she said pointedly. "This Sabrina, she could be a business associate, or she could be a sign of something else. One way or another, you need to know. It's 2025, Elizabeth. You can hire someone discreet, or you can confront him head-on. But don't sit there waiting for your world to come crashing down." Elizabeth forced a small smile. Easier said than done. As close as she was to Catherine, she wasn't ready to fling accusations at her husband. Divorce scandal, broken trust, all of it felt too terrifying, too real. Still, the seeds of doubt had been planted and were swiftly taking root. That night, while Richard was presumably working late in his study, Elizabeth took to the internet. She typed Sabrina Deschamps into the search bar. A quick swirl of results appeared: a French model, an Instagram account under the same name, pictures of a stunning brunette gracing runways in Milan and Paris, philanthropic appearances at events supporting women's education, and a suspiciously frequent mention of private appearances in New York. Elizabeth's eyes blurred over the images, reading captions that described Sabrina's rise from modest roots in Lyon, France, to high-fashion catwalks across Europe. The woman was breathtaking, a presence that exuded poise and glamour. A chilling thought occurred to Elizabeth. If Sabrina was truly in contact with Richard, this had to be more than business. The photographic evidence alone suggested Sabrina was the type of woman who turned heads wherever she went. She slammed her laptop shut, heart racing, her mind flooded with questions. How did they meet? How long had this been going on? Did their circle of acquaintances suspect anything? Elizabeth knew she was venturing down a rabbit hole, and once she started, there might be no turning back. When she finally climbed into bed that night, she found Richard fast asleep, or at least pretending to be. The faint glow of his phone illuminated the darkness on his bedside table. her breath caught. Her instincts told her that life as she knew it was teetering on the edge of a precipice. In the ensuing weeks, Elizabeth detected more signs. Richard's trips for business seemed more frequent, even suspiciously timed around major events in Paris or Milan. He suddenly developed an interest in French language lessons, something he never cared for before. And each time his phone buzzed, a certain tension or flicker of guilt shadowed his expression. But Elizabeth was no fool. She decided that if the worst was happening, she would handle it with every ounce of grace and cunning that high society life had taught her. She contacted an attorney, James Carlyle, an old friend from her college days at Brown University, now a partner at a prestigious Manhattan law firm. She did not file for anything. She simply laid out her concerns, asked for confidentiality, and consulted him on the legal path forward. There was something about stepping into James's office, a place of quiet authority, lined with leather-bound law books, that helped Elizabeth find her resolve. Divorce is messy, James warned, especially high-net-worth divorces. You'll need evidence, Elizabeth. Hard evidence, financial records, phone logs, anything that proves infidelity if you want a strong case. Elizabeth pressed her lips tight. The word infidelity sent a dagger through her heart. I'm not sure if I'm ready for that. I just need to protect myself in case. James placed a supportive hand on hers. I understand. Just know that I'm here if you need me. No judgments, no leaks. We can do everything with complete discretion. As Elizabeth left the law firm that day, a part of her wanted to run home, confront Richard, and demand answers. Yet she feared his response. A direct confrontation, if timed poorly, could give him a chance to cover his tracks. So she decided to play a quiet game of vigilance. If her suspicions were correct, she would find a moment, perhaps the perfect moment, to use the truth as leverage to protect herself. All the while, life went on. Fundraisers, corporate galas, quiet dinners. Everyone in their social circle continued to see them as the ultimate power couple, the philanthropic, cultured, elegantly coordinated Richard and Elizabeth Harrington. Behind closed doors, tension simmered like water nearing its boiling point. Meanwhile, half a world away in Paris, Sabrina Deschamps was lighting up catwalks in haute couture. She posted social media snapshots from the Ritz Paris, from front row seats at Fashion Week, from dinners at Le Jules Verne on the Eiffel Tower's second floor. Elizabeth, in her darkest moments of insomnia, scrolled through Sabrina's feed, noticing the subtle clues, an expensive watch glinting on Sabrina's wrist, that Elizabeth recognized as one Richard had once admired the corners of a luxurious suite that looked suspiciously like the Harringtons' favored place at the Plaza Athénée, or an unidentified man's hand in a candid selfie reflection. The puzzle pieces were beginning to form a devastating picture. Richard, for his part, believed he was navigating his double life with skill, but he was oblivious to the power of a wife's intuition. Nor did he imagine that Elizabeth would call upon her own network of resources to uncover the truth. He told himself that he was simply enjoying the perks of his fortune, travel beautiful company, the thrill of a secret romance that reignited his sense of youth and invincibility. If guilt occasionally gnawed at him, he quelled it with rationalizations. Elizabeth had become distant, or they had grown apart, or they stayed together more for social appearances than for passion. Yet deep down, Richard knew that every deception had an expiration date. Every phone call, every intimate moment in Paris, every flight plan left behind a breadcrumb. His elaborate facade was dangerously close to unraveling. Only time would tell how catastrophic the consequences would be when his wife finally learned the entire truth. And unbeknownst to him, that moment was coming sooner than he could possibly imagine. 2 months later, the autumn leaves had turned vibrant shades of russet and gold across the Harrington estate, and the days grew colder. The estate's staff donned warmer uniforms. Fireplaces roared in grand rooms, and the hush of approaching winter seemed to amplify every unspoken tension between Richard and Elizabeth. It was during this season that the first real whisper of Richard's infidelity escaped the confines of his private world. At a high society charity gala in Manhattan, an event benefiting the Metropolitan Museum of Art's new wing, Elizabeth noticed unusual stares and half-hidden smirks from people she had known for years. Was it her imagination, or did these socialites know something she didn't? The Harringtons arrived in their customary style, stepping out of a Rolls-Royce at the red carpet photographers, calling their names flashbulbs popping. Elizabeth wore a sleek black Givenchy gown that accentuated her graceful figure. Richard, clad in a tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, placed a hand at her lower back, as if guiding her into the venue. Cameras snapped, capturing a moment that radiated marital solidarity, at least on the surface. Inside, they mingled with the usual crowd of influential financiers, art patrons, and society figures. One of Richard's newest acquaintances, a chic French businesswoman named Isabelle Fournier, approached Elizabeth with an odd gleam in her eye. "Bonjour, Elizabeth Isabelle," said, air-kissing her on both cheeks. "How delightful to see you here. I heard Richard just returned from a business trip in Paris last week. I hope you two enjoyed the City of Love together." Elizabeth forced a gentle laugh. "I'm afraid I stayed home. The City of Love was for business only, I suspect." Isabel's eyebrows rose a fraction. "Oh, I assumed you would be there as well. I suppose there's always next time." Then, in a swirl of champagne glasses and idle chit-chat, Isabel disappeared into the crowd, leaving Elizabeth with a sudden chill. Isabel's tone was too coy, too knowing. Perhaps it was innocent. Perhaps not. Elizabeth felt her composure slipping, but she steeled herself to continue the evening. After all, there was a museum wing to finance, so she plastered on a gracious smile and did her philanthropic duty. Later that night, the museum's gilded halls were filled with music. Guests sipped vintage champagne and nibbled on canapes. For a moment, Elizabeth allowed herself to be pulled into the swirl of conversation about art acquisitions and upcoming galas in the Hamptons. She noticed Richard engaged in lively discussion with a group of men near a marble staircase. The tension in his shoulders had eased, replaced by the confident charm he wore so well. She excused herself from her circle and took a step closer to eavesdrop, pretending interest in a nearby sculpture. That was when she heard something that made her heart pound. "The young lady from Lyon," a voice said. "Spectacular, I hear." Richard's voice answered, "Yes, she is quite something. A wonderful collaborator for the new campaign." Elizabeth's breath caught. Lyon was Sabrina's hometown. Another man in the group laughed lightly. "Campaign indeed. Let's hope the wife doesn't catch wind, Harrington." Richard's tone shifted cautious, but still confident. "It's strictly business, gentlemen." The conversation drifted away to other matters, but Elizabeth's suspicions solidified. If there had been any lingering doubt, it was gone now. The humiliating fact that others seemed to know about Sabrina only sharpened Elizabeth's sense of betrayal. It was one thing for a marriage to fall apart privately, another thing entirely for it to become fodder for dinner-party gossip. The next day, Elizabeth retreated to Catherine Belville's townhouse in the Upper East Side. She collapsed on Catherine's plush sofa, feeling her composure teeter on the brink of collapse. Catherine, dressed in a flowing silk robe, poured them both a glass of Chablis. "What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." Elizabeth recounted the overheard exchange, the insinuations, and her growing certainty that Sabrina was far more than a business associate. Catherine listened quietly, nodding, her face grave. "You have to do something," she said. "You can't let him humiliate you like this in front of your entire social circle." Elizabeth's eyes brimmed with tears, but she blinked them away. "I've already consulted James Carlyle," she admitted. "I don't want to pull the trigger on a divorce yet, but I can't just let this continue." Catherine gave her a tight hug. "Gather more proof. In the world we live in, rumors fly. But if you want to confront him, you need tangible evidence, and do it in a way that leaves him no room to spin some corporate story." Elizabeth breathed in the delicate floral scent of Catherine's perfume, feeling both comforted and overwhelmed. Catherine was right. She needed more than rumor and suspicion. She needed something undeniable. Thus began Elizabeth's careful gathering of clues. She scoured credit card statements for suspicious charges, studied flight itineraries that didn't quite align with official business trips, and discreetly followed Sabrina's Instagram, where every carefully posed photo seemed to offer new insight, glimpses of hotels, high-end boutiques, or cryptic references to my darling. Elizabeth created a folder on her laptop marked innocuously as vacation plans, where she compiled screenshots, receipts, and every shred of evidence. Her emotional turmoil was immense. On sleepless nights, she paced her bedroom, torn between heartbreak and anger, sorrow and determination. She worried about how far Richard might go. Would he siphon money away into hidden accounts? Would he flaunt Sabrina publicly in the future, forcing Elizabeth to endure social humiliation? She could hardly bear the thought. Yet outwardly, Elizabeth continued to maintain her polished demeanor. She traveled to Los Angeles for a foundation event, chatted cordially with acquaintances, and even planned a small dinner party at the estate. No one would have guessed the emotional storm brewing beneath her composed smile. This dual existence was draining, but she kept reminding herself that patience would pay off. Still, there were nights when she couldn't resist confronting Richard indirectly. One evening, as they sat across from each other in the grand dining room, the table set with fine china and crystal, Elizabeth casually asked, "How was Paris?" "Darling, I haven't heard much about the last trip." Richard, cutting into his Wagyu steak, paused. "Oh, it was productive," he said vaguely. "Met some potential partners, looked into some properties for future investment. You know how it is." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "So no time for sightseeing?" "Or, I don't know, attending any fashion events?" She saw his hand tense. "Why would I bother with that?" he replied, forcing a dismissive laugh. Elizabeth smiled sweetly. "Just curious. I heard about Fashion Week. Thought maybe you'd indulge since you've taken up an interest in all things French." He hesitated, then let out a breath, returning his focus to his meal. "No, dear, it was all business. The French are quite formal in meetings. Little time for anything else." Sipping her wine, Elizabeth let the conversation fall silent. She caught a reflection of herself in the mirrored wall behind Richard's seat, a picture of sophisticated serenity, even though her insides twisted with betrayal. She thought of James Carlyle's warning. You need hard evidence, and she knew that a quiet confrontation over dinner would never suffice. She needed him to walk straight into her trap unprepared and exposed. That trap took shape one crisp afternoon. After rummaging through Richard's study under the guise of looking for foundation documents, Elizabeth stumbled across a hotel reservation for 2 at the Plaza Athénée in Paris. The date was in 3 weeks. There was no official business trip on the schedule for those days. With trembling hands, she snapped a photograph of the document. The occupant names were not listed, just R. Harrington plus guest. But that was enough. A mix of fury and heartbreak flared within her. She had everything she needed: flight itineraries, suspicious bank statements, the hotel reservation. The final piece was the perfect moment to strike, and she had just the idea. If Richard planned to fly Sabrina to Paris, Elizabeth would make sure she was there when they returned. She pictured the confrontation in her mind, Richard stepping off the private jet, Sabrina on his arm, only to find Elizabeth waiting at the gate with James Carlyle by her side. What Elizabeth didn't realize yet was that fate was about to offer her an even more dramatic stage for her plan. Because, as it turned out, Richard was growing bolder by the day. He had already devised an elaborate weekend getaway for Sabrina that very month. He had no idea that his carefully orchestrated affair was on the verge of blowing up spectacularly. The second Richard stepped onto the Gulfstream G650 on a brisk November afternoon, he felt an electric thrill surge through him. Sabrina Deschamps was already settled into one of the plush leather seats, her legs crossed elegantly, an Hermès scarf draped around her shoulders. She turned her doe-like eyes upon him and smiled, a flash of white teeth that conveyed both excitement and mischief. "Bonjour, mon amour," Sabrina purred as he set his briefcase down. He leaned in and pressed a quick kiss to her lips. "Ready to see Paris?" He asked, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. She laughed, low and melodic. "I was born ready, and you promised me a weekend I'd never forget." He nodded. "I always keep my promises." The plane took off smoothly, leaving behind the private terminal in Teterboro Airport. From the air, the New York skyline sparkled, gradually receding into the distance. Richard settled into the seat next to Sabrina, ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon from the flight attendant, and leaned back. This was what he lived for. The adrenaline rush of indulging in forbidden luxury, the tang of risk that gave life an edge. As the plane soared toward Europe, he comforted himself with the notion that everything was under control. Little did he know, Elizabeth was also well aware of his itinerary. She had discovered the exact flight details after paying a sizable fee to a private investigator who specialized in intelligence for high-net-worth individuals. It was distasteful but necessary. She wanted to know every step Richard and Sabrina took, not to confront them in Paris. No, that would be too dramatic a scene in a foreign city. She wanted them to savor their ill-gotten weekend, to feel invincible, only to come crashing down the moment they returned to American soil. Meanwhile, as the Gulfstream cruised at 40,000 feet, Sabrina gazed out the window. The clouds below them looked like an endless carpet, and she felt an odd mix of triumph and guilt. She wasn't naive. She knew Richard was married. She knew his wealth, his status, and his connections were part of what drew her to him. But she also genuinely liked his confidence, the way he moved through the world, as if it bent to his will. She told herself that Elizabeth was just a distant figure, an arrangement he kept for social convenience. Besides, they had grown distant, hadn't they? That was what he told her anyway. Once they landed in Paris, a chauffeur-driven Bentley carried them to the Plaza Athénée. Even though Sabrina had visited numerous luxury hotels in her modeling career, the sight of this iconic establishment in the heart of Avenue Montaigne still made her breath catch. The tree-lined streets, the crisp air, and the Eiffel Tower looming in the distance, this was the Paris of postcards and lovers' dreams. Their suite was lavish beyond measure, featuring a balcony with a mesmerizing view of the Eiffel Tower plush velvet furnishings and a marble bathroom that looked like a palace. Sabrina twirled in the center of the living area, letting out a delighted laugh. Richard watched her, unable to hide his satisfaction. "Welcome to our weekend," he said, opening a bottle of champagne that the hotel staff had prepared on ice. He poured her a glass, then one for himself. She took a sip, eyes glittering. "So what's on the agenda for our grand adventure?" He gave her a playful wink. "Dinner at Le Jules Verne tonight, followed by a surprise. Tomorrow, a private tour of the Louvre's restricted archives, courtesy of a friend I've invested with at the museum. And Sunday, well, that's another surprise." Sabrina's face lit up. "I can't wait." For the next 2 days, they roamed the streets of Paris as if they owned the city. Sabrina posed for impromptu photo shoots along the Seine, sat in corner cafes, nibbling croissants, and accompanied Richard to an exclusive fashion boutique where she tried on gowns that cost more than some people earned in a year. At night, they sipped wine in atmospheric restaurants, sharing discreet smiles and lingering touches. The city seemed to conspire in their favor, offering romantic backdrops at every turn. However, that invisible clock kept ticking. Elizabeth, far across the ocean, knew precisely when their flight home was scheduled, and she had spent every hour in preparation. With James Carlyle's help, she had drafted the necessary documents for an immediate separation and protective measures over her assets. She had even made arrangements to move certain valuable possessions. Family heirlooms, important documents, into secure storage. Once Richard realized what she was about to do, she wanted to ensure nothing could be taken from her. Catherine Belleville was also in the loop. She agreed to serve as Elizabeth's witness, moral support, and confidant during the impending confrontation. Catherine often repeated, "We'll do this with dignity," though the plan itself was anything but subtle. Confronting your cheating husband at the private airport terminal, accompanied by a lawyer, could never be described as low-key. The night before Richard and Sabrina's return, Elizabeth barely slept. She paced her bedroom phone in hand, reviewing updates from the private investigator. He had tracked Richard's lavish dinners, the side trips to high-end boutiques, and even a rumored visit to a jeweler. Perhaps Richard was purchasing a token of his affection for Sabrina. Elizabeth felt physically ill at the thought, yet each wave of nausea only strengthened her resolve. Enough was enough. She spent the early morning hours making final calls to James Carlyle and Catherine. The plan was set. James would arrange for them to be at the private gate upon the Gulf Stream's arrival. Elizabeth had gotten the time from the flight plan. The lawyer had cleared his schedule, ensuring that everything would go off without a hitch. "We have all the paperwork," James told her. A formal separation, a restraining order to prevent him from disposing of assets, and initial divorce filings, ready if we decide to proceed. You just have to sign in front of him, Elizabeth. She closed her eyes, steadying her voice. "I'm ready." After all these months of suspicion, heartbreak, and carefully collected evidence, Elizabeth felt as though she was starring in her own cinematic showdown. The day was bright and cold when Catherine and James arrived at the private terminal lounge. It was eerily quiet, just the low hum of overhead lights and the subdued chatter of a few staffers. Outside on the tarmac, they watched for any sign of the sleek Gulf Stream's approach. Elizabeth's heart thumped so loudly she was sure the others could hear it. She smoothed the front of her tailored navy coat, then checked her reflection in the glass. She looked calm, professional, and resolute. Exactly how she wanted to appear. Catherine placed a supportive hand on Elizabeth's shoulder. "No matter what happens, you're doing the right thing. Don't you dare doubt that." James gave her a reassuring nod. "You're not alone. Let him try to talk his way out of this. We have everything we need." Time seemed to slow as they glimpsed the plane in the distance, lowering gracefully toward the runway. The breath caught in Elizabeth's throat. Any second now, the final act of this long-running drama would begin. She could practically see the triumphant smile on Richard's face as he prepared to disembark with Sabrina by his side. Meanwhile, on the plane, Richard and Sabrina were in high spirits. The flight attendant offered them one last round of champagne to celebrate the end of a successful rendezvous. Richard clinked glasses with Sabrina, smiling as he recalled the memory of them sharing a passionate kiss in the Louvre's hidden corridor. He was already planning their next getaway. Maybe skiing in Gstaad or a yacht trip through the Greek Isles. The possibilities felt endless. As the wheels touched down, he pulled out his phone and sent a brief text to his driver, ready for pickup. Sabrina checked her reflection in a compact mirror, smoothing a stray hair. "Thank you," she said softly, leaning in to kiss Richard's cheek. This weekend was more than I ever expected. He placed an arm around her waist. "It's just the start, my dear. I have a feeling we'll have many more memories to make." The plane taxied to a stop at the private terminal. Through the window, Richard noticed a small group standing near one of the glass doors. Squinting, he thought he recognized a figure. Elizabeth. His heart lurched. Immediately, 1,000 alarms went off in his mind. Why would she be here, and was that? Their family lawyer, James Carlyle, and Catherine Belville beside them. An icy dread began to seep into his veins. He felt Sabrina's hands clasp around his arm, but he barely registered her presence. His carefully constructed world was about to collide, perhaps cataclysmically, with reality. No more illusions, no more excuses. The stage was set for the confrontation that would define the rest of their lives. And outside, Elizabeth waited with unwavering determination, ready to greet her unfaithful husband and his mistress with one final devastating smile. The moment Richard stepped out of the plane, an unseasonably cold wind whipped across the tarmac. Sabrina followed close behind, clutching her designer trench coat shut against the chill. They had expected a warm, discreet reception. Maybe the chauffeur waiting with the Rolls-Royce, the usual hush of private travel. Instead, they encountered a tableau of tension. Elizabeth stood in the terminal doorway, posture rigid, chin lifted with an icy elegance. Beside her, James Carlyle carried a sleek black folder. Catherine Belville watched from a step behind, her eyes narrowed in disapproval. A hush fell over the small cluster of airport personnel who sensed something grave unfolding. Instinctively, Richard reached for Sabrina's hand, then thought better of it and dropped it. The last thing he needed was to fuel Elizabeth's fury any more than necessary. His mind raced through excuses, strategies, anything to diffuse the situation. But the sight of Elizabeth's resolute expression told him that no simple lie could fix this. He forced a smile, trying to play it off casually. "Elizabeth, what are you doing here?" She offered a cool nod. "I might ask you the same." "Richard, your business trip ended, a week ago?" Sabrina stiffened, glancing at Richard for direction. He swallowed hard, stepping forward. "This isn't the place to discuss personal matters," he muttered, gesturing toward the staffers nearby. Elizabeth moved closer, not allowing him to dodge her. "Oh, I agree. Let's step inside. I believe, Mr. Tour, Carlyle has some documents that require your immediate attention." Catherine gave Sabrina a withering glance, as if swatting away a pesky insect with her eyes. Sabrina, not fully grasping the gravity of the confrontation, followed them inside, but maintained a few feet of distance. The terminal's lounge area was small yet plush, lined with comfortable chairs and a coffee station. Normally it was a tranquil place for private flyers to wait in comfort. Today it felt like a courtroom. Once inside, Elizabeth turned on her heel, facing Richard squarely. She spoke in a measured tone, each word crisp. "I won't mince words, I know everything. About your affair with Miss Deschamps, about the trips, the gifts, the little secrets. I have the receipts, the flight records, and the credit card bills. I have the photos, the social media posts, every excruciating detail." Richard's mouth went dry. He cleared his throat, glancing at Sabrina, who looked paler by the moment. "Elizabeth, please. We should discuss this privately." "Oh, you'd like privacy now, would you?" Elizabeth retorted. "When you've paraded your mistress around Paris, do you really care about privacy?" James Carlyle stepped forward, opening the folder. "Richard Harrington, as counsel for Mrs. Elizabeth Harrington. I'm presenting you with the following: a formal separation agreement, a protective order, preventing you from shifting or liquidating joint assets, and an initial filing for divorce, should Mrs. Harrington choose to proceed. We advise you to review these documents with your own legal representation immediately." Richard felt a wave of panic followed by indignation. He reached for the papers, flipping through them, his eyes barely focusing on the text. "This is insane," he muttered. "We can't handle this in an airport lounge. We need to talk, Elizabeth." Elizabeth's gaze never wavered. "I think we've done enough talking for one marriage, don't you? And clearly, you've done plenty of it with your companion." Sabrina bristled at the tone, stepping forward. "Listen, Madame Harrington, if I had known—" Elizabeth held up a hand to silence her, her voice dripping with controlled anger. "Don't! Just don't! You knew he was married, and if you didn't, you must be willfully blind." She turned back to Richard, eyes shining with tears she refused to shed. "How could you humiliate me like this?" For a moment, a flicker of guilt crossed Richard's face. He glanced around helplessly, recognizing that the staffers were no doubt eavesdropping. "Elizabeth, you have every right to be angry. Let's just go home and talk. We can figure this out." She gave a soft, bitter laugh. "Home? Which home? The one you've turned into a mausoleum for our dead marriage. I'm not stepping foot in that house with you again. Not until this is resolved." Richard turned to James. "Is this really necessary? We can settle this privately, for God's sake." James remained composed. "Mr. Harrington, your wife is well within her rights to protect herself. I suggest you take these documents, consult your lawyer, and prepare for negotiations. I also suggest you abide by the financial restrictions we've outlined. Any attempt to conceal or relocate assets will be met with legal consequences." Richard exhaled sharply, his pulse hammering in his ears. He turned to Sabrina, who looked ready to bolt. "Give me a minute alone," he said to Elizabeth, gesturing toward a side corridor. "Please." Catherine cleared her throat. "Elizabeth, are you comfortable with that?" Elizabeth studied Richard's face. She hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, 1 minute. But Sabrina stays right here." Sabrina let out a small sound of protest, but Richard shot her a firm look. Elizabeth, Catherine, and James watched as Richard and Elizabeth walked a few steps away out of immediate earshot. He lowered his voice. "Elizabeth, I know I've hurt you. I never intended for this to—" She raised a hand, her eyes glassy with tears. "Don't feed me that line. You carried on for months. At what point did you intend to stop?" He looked away, shame coiling in his chest. "We've been distant for years. It felt like we were just going through the motions. Sabrina was—" An escape. An escape, Elizabeth repeated, her voice trembling with anger. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to find out everyone in our social circle knew? To realize I was the last to know about my own marriage. If you were unhappy, you could have talked to me. We could have tried therapy or parted ways amicably. But you chose betrayal. He reached for her hands, but she pulled back as if scorched. I know he whispered despair in his eyes. I was a coward. I don't want to lose everything we've built. Elizabeth let out a laugh, edged with despair. You already have Richard. You just don't see it yet. They stood in silence for a moment, the enormity of their ruined marriage settling over them like a shroud. Finally, Elizabeth turned to rejoin James and Catherine. Richard followed, hands clenched in frustration. The lounge was silent, except for the gentle hum of the air conditioner. Sabrina took a hesitant step forward. Richard, what's going on? Are you coming with me? Elizabeth raised an eyebrow, a cold half-smile on her lips. Oh, he's coming with you all right. But he'll have to deal with the legal ramifications. I've had the locks changed at our estate, and the staff has been instructed not to allow him entry. The same goes for you, should you ever entertain the notion of visiting. Richard felt cornered fury and shame warring inside him. Elizabeth, please. Don't do this. Let's handle this calmly. Her voice was resolute. I am calm. Calm enough to know that I deserve better. She looked at James. Is there anything else to address? James lifted his chin. We're finished here, Mrs. Harrington. Unless Mr. Harrington has any further questions, we'll be leaving. Sabrina's cheeks flamed. She tugged at Richard's sleeve. Richard, I don't want to stand here like an idiot. Can we leave? He shook her off his mind, churning with panic. But Elizabeth's demeanor left no room for negotiation. She had come prepared, and she was leaving in control. Already, Catherine was guiding Elizabeth toward the exit. Just before stepping outside, Elizabeth paused. She turned back, leveling her gaze on Richard one last time. Her voice was surprisingly gentle, though laced with heartbreak. I never thought you'd do this to me. But I suppose I was naive. Good luck, Richard. With that, she walked out, her posture, regal chin held high. The glass door shut behind her, leaving an echoing silence in the lounge. For a moment, Richard just stood there, staring at the spot where Elizabeth had been. A staffer cleared his throat, reminding them they were not alone. Sabrina glanced around, feeling thoroughly exposed. Richard, what do we do? He exhaled a ragged breath. I need to call my lawyer, he said, running a hand through his hair. We'll figure something out. But even as he tried to sound confident, he couldn't shake the dread settling in his stomach. He pictured the estate he might lose, the bank accounts that would be frozen, the future deals overshadowed by scandal. And in that moment, he realized just how thoroughly his world had been turned upside down. The storm he had courted with lies and secrecy had finally broken, and there was nowhere left to run. After the courthouse confrontation, Richard found himself increasingly isolated. The Greenwich estate was no longer his sanctuary. It now belonged solely to Elizabeth. His corner office at Harrington Capital, once bustling with assistants and high-profile meetings, felt strangely hollow. Many of his trusted allies had begun to distance themselves. Some partners quietly paused deals. Others didn't return his calls at all. He had underestimated the weight of public perception. What began as whispered gossip soon crystallized into judgment. Media outlets devoured the scandal, branding him as yet another powerful man who thought he could have it all. and lost more than he ever imagined. Behind the scenes, Richard's legal team was under pressure. James Carlyle's firm had subpoenaed financial records tied to dormant shell companies Richard thought were long forgotten. Offshore accounts were flagged. An audit loomed. Even the board of one of his flagship real estate trusts demanded answers, worried about reputational risk. Meanwhile, Elizabeth thrived in quiet, deliberate ways. She kept a low public profile, but made calculated moves in private. She directed interior restorations at the estate, removing every trace of Richard's influence. The study he once ruled with iron precision converted into a music library. The grand hallway portraits of their past travels replaced by bold works from female artists she admired, but Richard had dismissed. Her legal battle continued with quiet intensity. James and his team worked tirelessly, and Elizabeth was prepared. Every bank statement, flight log, and social media post she had gathered in those early days now served as proof not only of Richard's affair, but of his financial deceit. Every document pushed her closer to freedom. Despite her composed exterior, Elizabeth wasn't untouched by grief. Some nights, she still awoke with phantom memories. Richard's laughter echoing down the hallway, or the way he used to watch her play piano from the staircase, pretending to read, but always listening. Yet when morning came, she rose stronger, steadier. She reminded herself memory was not permission to stay in pain. Catherine, ever loyal, stayed close. "This is where women make or break themselves," she told Elizabeth over chamomile tea. "You, my dear, are making history." One afternoon, an unexpected letter arrived, handwritten, the paper thick and cream-colored. It was from Sabrina. Elizabeth hesitated before opening it. Her first instinct was to toss it aside, but curiosity won. "Dear Elizabeth, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I deserve that. I never should have believed the things Richard told me about your marriage. He painted you as cold, indifferent, someone who had already moved on. I realize now how wrong I was. I never meant to be the villain in your story. I've left New York. I've signed no press deals. I don't want to profit from any of this. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. Not for falling for him, that was my mistake, but for disrespecting a woman I didn't know, and now wish I had." Elizabeth read the note twice. Then she folded it neatly and placed it in the back of her desk drawer. She neither forgave nor responded. Some things didn't need an answer. The legal proceedings entered their final phase. Depositions were scheduled. Richard, increasingly anxious, agreed to mediation. The alternative, a full trial, public and prolonged, would destroy what little he had left of his public image. In mediation, Elizabeth sat across from him for the first time since that brief courthouse exchange. He looked older, thinner, his sharp cheekbones, more pronounced eyes, sunken from too many sleepless nights. "I assume you've come to agree to my terms," she said, calmly breaking the silence. "I've come to end this," he replied, voice strained. "Before we lose everything." Elizabeth tilted her head. He exhaled. "Fine. Before I lose everything." For hours they negotiated through attorneys. Elizabeth never wavered. She wanted the estate, the foundation, and full control of their joint philanthropic holdings. She asked for no alimony, only a clean split and a sum Richard initially balked at, but eventually conceded. As they wrapped up, he turned to her one last time. "You really hate me, don't you?" She looked him straight in the eyes. "No. I don't hate you. That would mean I still cared enough to feel that deeply. His face flickered with something regret, or maybe recognition. But she didn't let it linger. She rose, nodded to her lawyer, and walked out. The final settlement was signed 2 weeks later. With that, their marriage on paper and in spirit was over. Public statements were coordinated. Elizabeth's was brief and graceful. Mr. Harrington and I have chosen to go our separate ways. I remain committed to my music and philanthropic work, and appreciate the support of those who've respected my privacy during this time. Richard issued a longer statement, filled with vague apologies and emphasis on future business ventures. He avoided the word affair. In private, he spiraled. Sabrina had left. Investors were wary. The press moved on, but the stain lingered. His name, once synonymous with power, was now just another headline in a cautionary tale. Elizabeth, on the other hand, began again. She released a recording of her first solo piano album in over a decade. It was a quiet triumph, raw, emotional, masterful. Critics praised it as a bold return from a woman who understands loss and rebirth. Her foundation expanded into programs supporting women re-entering the workforce after divorce or abuse. She became a quiet icon for resilience, though she never embraced the spotlight. She had no interest in public revenge. Her strength was in building, not tearing down. On the 1-year anniversary of the airport confrontation, Elizabeth stood on the balcony of her estate, overlooking the gardens. Spring had returned. The air was full of bird song, and the tulips, her mother's favorite, bloomed in the breeze. She held a cup of tea and allowed herself one last look back. Not in bitterness, but in recognition. She had survived the storm. More than that, she had outgrown it. And somewhere she hoped Richard understood that. She smiled, not the smile of vengeance or triumph, but one of peace. Her story, once defined by someone else's betrayal, was now fully her own. 2 weeks later, the legal storm reached a pivotal moment. Elizabeth filed a motion to freeze Richard's assets, suspecting he might hide funds through offshore accounts. The hearing was set at a small courthouse in Fairfield County, far from the grand stages Richard was used to, but the perfect venue for truth to emerge. Elizabeth arrived first, in a tailored charcoal suit, composed but resolute. Beside her stood Catherine Belville, offering steady support, and her lawyer, James Carlyle. Minutes later, Richard entered in a dark suit, accompanied by his own attorney, Thomas Addington. His usual charm was dulled, jaw tense, gaze guarded. Notably absent was Sabrina, advised to stay far away from the legal fray. Inside, Judge Regina Watts presided with cool authority. James presented the case bank records, suggested Richard was moving money into offshore accounts post-affair. We're simply asking the court to freeze those assets until their origin and intent are reviewed, he argued. Addington countered, claiming the accounts were tied to international ventures, and freezing them would cripple ongoing business. Speculation, not evidence, he insisted. Judge Watts listened, flipping through the documents. After several tense minutes, she ruled, Mrs. Harrington's request is granted with conditions. Funds may remain accessible for verified business use, but will be monitored by a court-appointed auditor. Elizabeth exhaled in quiet relief. A win small but significant. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed with questions. Cameras flashed, microphones extended. Elizabeth, composed, walked past them without a word. But just as she reached the hallway's end, Richard approached her. "Elizabeth," he said, voice low. "Can we talk?" She paused. Catherine bristled protectively, but Elizabeth nodded. 1 minute. They stepped aside. He looked tired, hair slightly mussed, suit creased, eyes shadowed. "I'm sorry," Richard said. "I know that doesn't change anything, but you deserve to hear it." She studied him for a long moment. "You betrayed everything we built. You didn't just lie, you humiliated me." "I know," he said. "I got lost. I didn't think. You didn't want to think," she cut in. "You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." He shifted uncomfortably. "I don't want this to turn into a war. Not for us. Not for our legacy." "Then be honest. Stop hiding assets. Make this easier for both of us." "I'll try," he said. "But some of those funds are tangled in projects." She stepped back. "Then untangle them. I'm done cleaning up after you." She turned away, rejoining her team. Behind her, Richard stood silent, defeated. Outside, Elizabeth climbed into her car. Catherine sat beside her, clasping her hand. "You okay, I will be," Elizabeth replied, eyes forward. The next few weeks were a blur of negotiations. Elizabeth demanded the estate financial restitution and clean separation. Richard, pressured by investors and the growing scandal, agreed to most terms. He still fought on details, percentages, residuals, but the battle was largely lost. Meanwhile, Sabrina hovered in the background. Their once thrilling affair soured under scrutiny. Public interest surged after a tabloid leaked their Paris trip. She grew restless, tired of the limbo, uncertain whether Richard was worth the wreckage. He tried to reassure her with dinners, promises, and plans. But at one restaurant, when she asked, "Where do I fit in your life now?" Richard hesitated too long. The glamour had faded. By month's end, she left. Some said it was for a modeling job in Tokyo. Others whispered she fled the scandal. Either way, she was gone. Back in Greenwich, Elizabeth reclaimed her identity. She returned to the estate, renovated, refreshed. She resumed her music performing at Carnegie Hall to critical acclaim. The Harrington Family Foundation continued its work now under her sole leadership. Eventually, the divorce was finalized. No more courtrooms or headlines, just papers signed, names removed, and a final quiet goodbye. For Richard, the cost was steep millions in settlement. A tarnished name, a life he no longer recognized. He had chased excitement and lost everything real in the process. For Elizabeth, the cost had been emotional, but the return was freedom. She had waited at the gate with her lawyer, her papers, and one last smile, not out of revenge, but to reclaim her power. Now she moved forward, not as the wife scorned, but as a woman reborn. You've just journeyed through a tale of splendor and heartbreak, where a seemingly perfect millionaire lifestyle masked secrets too big to contain. In the end, Elizabeth found the courage to confront betrayal head-on, armed with evidence, resolve, and the power of her own self-worth. Richard paid a steep price for his deceptions, realizing too late that true riches lie not in flashy getaways or hidden bank accounts, but in love, trust, and respect. Call to action. If this story gripped your heart and kept you on the edge of your seat, remember to hit the like button and share it with friends who crave a dose of real-life drama. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more engrossing tales that shine a light on human nature, relationships, and the choices that can change our destinies forever. Your support means the world. Thank you for watching.